In this video, we'll learn education governance of K-12 schools in the United States. A major issue of governance is the level of authority and control over education. In essence, it's about who have the decision-making power over education issues. For example, who get to decide whether a state can take over schools that have been chronically low performing, who decide what evidence is used to judge school performance, who decide how to evaluate student learning and teacher evaluation, who decide curriculum and textbook adoption, who authorize charter schools. We'll discuss the education governance at 3 levels: the federal level, state level, and the school district level. You can find a lot of content on education governance at the federal level in my article on the Every Student Succeeds Act. It is the federal law that governs education at the federal level. The Every Student Succeeds Act was passed with strong bipartisan support in Congress and was signed into law by President Obama on December 10, 2015. The Every Student Succeeds Act, also known as ESSA, was a reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, which was signed by President Lyndon Johnson as part of his administration's War on Poverty campaign. The purpose of ESEA of 1965 was to provide additional resources for vulnerable students. ESEA offered new grants to school districts serving low-performing students. ESEA also offered federal grants for textbooks and library books. It created special education centers and created scholarships for low-income college students. ESEA enabled the federal government to influence national education policy by providing resources and establishing programs for disadvantaged population of students. For example, Title I program aimed to provide all children significant opportunities to receive a fair, equitable, and high-quality education, and to close educational achievement gaps. In 1979, the U.S. Department of Education was established after Congress passed the Department of Education Organization Act. In 1983, President Ronald Reagan appointed the U.S. National Commission on Excellence in Education. The commission had 18 members from the private sector, government, and education. It published a landmark report titled A Nation at Risk, which stated that American schools were failing to meet the national need for a competitive workforce. The same report was framed differently by Democrats and Republicans to advocate for their proposed education policies. On the one hand, Democrats argue that the failing education demanded greater federal control. On the other hand, Republicans argue that the failing education was a testament of failure in past federal programs, calling for eliminating federal control over education. The presidential campaign of George W. Bush in the late 1990s took notice of the unpopular Republican education proposals. Bush's campaign repositioned the Republican Party on education by embracing an active but reformed federal role in promoting school improvement. With the 2001 reauthorization of ESEA, the No Child Left Behind Act gave the federal government more control over national education policy. No Child Left Behind required states to test students in reading and mathematics. establish proficiency standards, and track and report school-wide progress toward meeting annual performance goals. The ultimate goal was to achieve 100% proficiency for all students by the end of 2013 and 14 school year. No Child Left Behind substantially limited states' decision-making power over testing and school improvement efforts, evoking states' growing dissatisfaction. By 2006, 8 states had defied No Child Left Behind by introducing legislation in direct opposition to No Child Left Behind, and 30 states introduced or passed legislation asking Congress to modify No Child Left Behind. In addition to states, teachers' unions and interest groups had grown dissatisfied with No Child Left Behind, which pushed high-stakes, test-based accountability. In 2007, ESEA was supposed to be reauthorized. However, Congress, with a Democratic majority in both bodies of Congress, and the Bush administration failed to make progress in reauthorization. Both the legislative and executive branches of the government agreed that No Child Left Behind was flawed, but disagreed with how to fix it. In September 2011, criticizing Congress for inaction on ESEA reauthorization, the Obama administration announced to offer state waivers from specific provisions in No Child Left Behind, including meeting the goal of 100% proficiency by 2014. In exchange for No Child Left Behind waivers, the Obama administration, under the leadership of Secretary of Education Arne Duncan, required states to adopt Common Core state standards and evaluate teachers based in part on student performance. Although the justification of waivers was to modify the shortcomings in No Child Left Behind, the Obama administration aggressively used its executive power to grant No Child Left Behind waivers to advance the administration's policy priorities not specified in No Child Left Behind, such as implementing teacher evaluation systems. The aggressive use of executive power was met by congressional resistance. With the 2012 presidential election approaching, Congress planned to reauthorize ESEA in 2013, more likely in 2014 if a Republican was elected president. After Obama won re-election, Congress passed ESSA with provisions to sharply reduce the role of the executive branch, specifically limiting the ability of the Secretary of Education to grant waivers, requiring states to adopt specific academic standards, assessments, accountability systems, or teacher evaluation systems. All 4 of those components were included in previous waivers granted under Secretary Duncan. Under ESSA, the Secretary of Education can no longer use the waiver process as a policy lever to coerce or provide incentives for states to implement policies set by U.S. Department of Education. What has happened after the passage of ESSA in 2015? It is hard to imagine that U.S. Department of Education would cede its power willingly. It has been a tug of war as the power shifts from U.S. Department of Education to state and local education agencies. ESSA aims to restore states and local leaders' control over education and increase flexibility on school accountability, teacher quality, and school improvement. When the then Secretary of Education, John King, testified in Congress in 2016, he was reminded multiple times by House Education Committee Chairman about his predecessor, Arne Duncan's smart lawyer remarks. When Duncan was asked about ESSA narrowing the Secretary of Education's authority in an interview with Political Pro in December 2015, Duncan responded, "The final thing is we have every ability to implement, to regulate the law." Philosophically, I agree with a bunch of this stuff, and candidly, our lawyers are much smarter than many of the folks who were working on this bill. There is some face-saving things you give up, some talking points that you give up, which we always do because we are focused on substance and we have every ability to implement. That's all I have ever wanted. U.S. Department of Education could use regulations to provide clarity on issues that were not clearly specified in ESSA, but it used its proposed regulations as an instrument of power grip. An example is how to hold states and districts accountable if less than 95% of students participate in statewide assessment. ESSA allows states to decide how the 95% participation rate is factored into the statewide accountability system. However, U.S. Department of Education's proposed regulations that had specific consequences of low participation rate in state accountability system. Secretary of Education John King announced several proposed amendments that would require each state to implement one of several punitive measures for any school that fails to comply with the 95% participation mandate, such as a lower summative rating of the school, differentiating schools that miss 95 participation rate and schools developing and implementing improvement plans. Moreover, the approval of state ESSA plans was another instrument used by U.S. Department of Education to retain its power. ESSA allows states to use student access to and completion of advanced coursework as an indicator of school quality and student success. However, U.S. Department of Education criticized a state's proposal to incorporate student performance in advanced placement and international baccalaureate exams in the academic performance indicator. Most of the bumpy ride of power shift took place when Obama was in the White House with Arne Duncan and John King as the Secretaries of Education. Betsy DeVos, as the Secretary of Education in the Trump administration, mostly declined to aggressively use the U.S. Department of Education's power of approving the state's proposed ESSA plan as an opportunity to assert more federal power. It remains to be seen how much flexibility the Biden administration will give to states in terms of education issues. At the state level, there are 4 different governance structures. There are 14 states shaded in red color. In those states, a governor appoints a state board of education, and then the state board of education appoints chief state school officers. There are 8 states shaded in orange color. In those states, a state board of education is elected, and then the state board of education appoints chief state school officers. In yellow states, a governor appoints a state board of education, but the chief state school officers are elected. In states that are shaded in light green, a governor appoints both state board of education and the chief state school officers. In the state of Georgia, voters select a governor and a state school superintendent. Governor then appoints 14 board members of Georgia Board of Education. Each board member represents a congressional district. The Georgia Board of Education works with the state school superintendent to govern education in Georgia. At the district level, voters select school board members who then make decisions on education in the school district. School boards then hire superintendents who are the chief executive officers of school districts. If a school board is not happy with a superintendent's performance, the board can terminate the superintendent's contract. During a superintendent's hiring process, a rejected superintendent candidate felt he was discriminated against because of his age and race. He later filed a lawsuit. The district school board decided to settle the lawsuit. In this video, we discuss the education governance at 3 levels: the federal level, state level, and the school district level. We will introduce school law in the next video.